Okay, good evening, everybody. I can see people are joining our webinar tonight looking at dairy to beef and calf health. First of all, thank you very much for your time that you've taken out this evening to join us on this webinar. My name is Tommy Heffernan. I'm a veterinary consultant with Precision Microbes, and I'm delighted that we have such a wide, big audience, over 700 people registered for this evening's webinar. I think it's testament probably to the quality of our two speakers we have tonight. I'm looking forward to a very good discussion. Thanks to Interchem for hosting this webinar, our Irish distributor. But I'm delighted to have our two speakers tonight. I told them beforehand that there will be no massive bibliographies or backgrounds. I know them both well. Eamon O'Connell, who's a veterinarian from County Tipperary in Ireland, in Summerhill Vets, and people will know him from he's veterinary as well as these articles in the Independent, which are weekly. Passionate about cattle health, farm animal health, and also we have Batty from Lambert Leonard and May in the UK, who's also a passionate veterinarian and, like Eamon, a brilliant communicator. And I'm looking forward to hearing both of them speak. So one of the things this evening we're going to have is the discussion. So we're going to have a panel discussion. One thing I'm very conscious of people is you might be calving cows at the moment. You might be in the middle of calving. You might be buying in calves or looking at rearing calves. So you've taken time out of your busy schedule to come and join us this evening. So the flow tonight, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a video actually to start off. So Eamon O'Connell, when I asked him about this webinar, decided would it be a good idea to go into a calf shed and do this live? Maybe we'll do it next year. But what we did as a compromise is, and I think it was very practical, is we went out on farm with him last week and we recorded a video in a farm, in a dairy farm, at the start of calving. And it really gives us kind of a deep insight from the ground on the practical aspects of calf rearing. So that's what we're going to do in a minute or two. Then after that, we're going to hear a presentation on dairy to beef from Hannah and all her experience in that area. And anybody who's heard Hannah speak knows how passionate, enthusiastic, and knowledgeable she is in calves. And then just for a brief 5 minutes, I will do a little bit of background on the application of precision microbes. I'll give can't help myself, a few bits and pieces that I think are relevant to dairy to beef as well. And then we'll go into questions. So with that in mind, Aidan, I think you can start getting our first presentation, which is a video of Eamon ready, and we'll play it. So what's going to appear on your screen now for the next 15 minutes or so is a video of Eamon on farm going through the essentials of calf health. Hi, I'm Eamon O'Connell from Summerhill Vets here in Enna. For this webinar, I thought, look, let's do something a little bit different for the time of year. Let's get out on farm and see some of the real world, real life things that are going on. We're going to cover a couple of different areas of calf rearing in this video, from calving to colostrum management, hygiene, ventilation, stress, all the way through to weaning. It's for people rearing calves, it's for people buying in calves. So I'm looking forward to enjoying this video, picking up some tips, and then we'll have lots of questions afterwards. Here's where it all starts. The calving pen, the cow, and luckily enough for us this evening, a freshly born calf. We're going to talk about where the cow calves, how she calves, and what environment the calf arrives into. So if we have a look here, it's picture perfect really. Nice cow, perfectly just after calving. Calf on a nice, clean, dry bed of straw. Pen has been disinfected. If you look down the bottom, a lovely slope on the calving pen, just gentle enough into a drainage area to take any moisture away. Fresh water for the cow, and just behind me, an area to bail her up. Safety when you're calving, always very important. So how the calf arrives, first of all, look, you need to have stuff on hand. You don't need to be looking for things when you need them. So the biggest thing, obviously, is your calving ropes, and if you need it, calving jack and lube. So just behind the cow there is where this farmer always keeps his calving jack, washed, clean, disinfected, ropes hanging up, and just up behind it on the pillar, some lube. So this cow calved without assistance, calf landed on the ground. What are we looking at? The first thing in the world this calf has to come in contact with is the environment, and the environment here is perfect. You don't want this calf arriving into dirty, very messy, wet, ground. He needs to arrive onto something clean, because the bacteria he comes in contact with, that's going to frame the rest of his life. Frame his microbiome, get him off to the best start. So here, best start you could possibly get really. As soon as he hits the ground, what are we looking at doing? We're looking at his navel and make sure that's treated.
Again, is it handy? There's no point in when the calf is born, oh, where do I leave the navel dip or the navel spray? Again, in this farm, he just leaves it up on the wall, up beside the pillar. He can reach out, grab the navel spray the calf. Bob's your uncle. Cow is bailed up here. He can just check the 4 quarters and make sure they're okay. Already then, this calf is off to the best start, even before it gets any colostrum. Okay, so our cow's calved, calf's navel is dipped, mother's looking after the baby in there. We moved on immediately to probably the most important thing of all, which is colostrum, liquid gold. A plan is key. Make a plan and stick with it every time. Immediately the first thing we're thinking of is hygiene. And look, we can go with what's the best, but we have to go with what's reality as well. We're on farm this morning, lots of cows calving. Here's our colostrum bucket with freshly harvested colostrum. Is it a little bit dirty? Absolutely. And we're going to talk about what effect that has on colostrum. So the first thing we need to know about is colostrum, the 3-2-1. We all know about that. 3 litres in the first 2 hours of the first milking. But we've got to have a little bit think past that. We've got a big calf in there. Is he 40 kilos? He's not far away from it. 3 litres probably isn't going to cut the mustard there. We're looking at 4. We're looking at 4 litres of good quality colostrum, and how is he going to get it? First of all, the decision is, are they going to suck like the suckler cow, or are they going to be tubed? In reality, all these dairy calves, if you want to get enough into them, they have to be tubed. He's 40 kilos, he's going to need about 4 litres. He just does not have the energy or the wherewithal to suck that much, so we definitely have to tube him. And while we're talking about tubing, we'll look at the 2 different types of stomach tube that's on most farms. So here's the basic one that we all use. Roughly speaking, when it's full, 2.5 litres at a push 3. I don't know too many farmers that are getting 2 of these into calves. So realistically, for that calf in there that's 40 kilos, presuming his mother's colostrum quality is good enough, which we'll talk about in a second, is there enough in this bag? The simple answer is no. Realistically, you're looking at a stomach tube that can hold 4 litres or a bit more, something like this. At least then you don't have to revisit twice. You make it as easy as possible so that it can be repeated, simple. Let's talk about colostrum quality then. First of all, hygiene. Again, we've mentioned a little bit dirty, but that's the reality on farm. We're going to keep things as clean as we can, but sometimes they're not always as clean as we can. We get the milk out of the cow quickly as possible, and into the calf as quickly as possible. Time is of the essence. The longer the cow is calved, whether the milk is in her bag or in the bucket, the quality of immunoglobulins and antibodies she's going to pass on to her calf are depleting, minute by minute, hour by hour. The bacteria that's just some going to be on the inside of this bucket, they're going to deplete the quality of colostrum as well. If you don't measure, you don't know. There's a refractometer. Everybody should know what this is at this stage, but if you don't, here it is. We put a little drop of milk on it and we measure the quality of the colostrum of the cow. Once the colostrum quality is good enough, we can feed that to the calf and hopefully get him off to the best start. And a quick mention, if you want to audit your colostrum management and your colostrum quality, get your vet involved. You can take some bloods off of calves, up to 5 days calved, check their total proteins. Now, again, if you've bought in calves and they're a little bit older than that, there is a biomedia test that will test the blood sample to see do they get enough passive transfer of good quality colostrum, good quality antibodies. So if in any doubt, get your vet involved, get some bloods taken, and you can see just where you sit on that regard. Okay, we've talked about the liquid gold, we've talked about driving up immunity, and we're looking at the seesaw principle where we want to drive immunity up and drive infection pressure down. So here we are, first thing about driving infection pressure down is biosecurity. Dip in your boots in a proper disinfectant before you come on farm. That's the vet, that's the AI man, that's the sales rep, that's everybody, including yourself. If you head off down to your buddy to have a look and see what kind of calves he has, you don't know what you're bringing back. So get your boots disinfected for everybody. That's biosecurity, that's how disease can enter. Now we're going to talk about how we can stop it from spreading if it does get on the farm. So we'll talk about cleaning and hygiene. Brilliant at the really boring stuff. This is boring, but if you're brilliant at it, you'll drive infection pressure down. So how to clean your feeding equipment. It may sound really boring, it is, but a lot of people aren't cleaning their feeding equipment properly. They've got a disinfectant and they say, okay, I've disinfected it, it's fine. But if we have a look into this feeder that's been used this morning and has been given a quick rinse, what can we see? We can see that scum. Look at it, that milk scum there, that lipid layer, and the bacteria love that. All the bugs love that. They hide out underneath it. So no matter what disinfectant you throw on that, it can't get under that lipid layer to get attached or to attack the bacteria. So what we're going to talk about for cleaning is the difference between disinfection and detergent. So disinfectant kills the bugs, but we need a detergent to break down the lipid layer. And it couldn't be any simpler or any cheaper. Your basic washing up liquid breaks down that lipid layer. So get your washing up liquid mixed up with water, give it a quick scrub. That gets rid of all that scum. Your disinfection is next. Your peracetic acid diluted kills off all the bacteria. You're driving infection pressure down cheaply, easily, boringly, yes. But ultimately, for the safeguarding of your calves, keeping disease to a minimum, this is the key. The same principle applies to all your feeding equipment, to your stomach tubes that we looked at earlier on. That colostrum is jam-packed full of fats. So the layer of lipid inside the tube in particular can build up, and bacteria loves and bugs love surviving in that. So you need to get your detergent in to break that down, then your disinfection in on top after every single feed. And again, and we'll cover it in a little while when we're talking about stomach tubes and feeding equipment. If there is any sick animals, make sure you have separate ones, because as good as we go for cleaning and disinfectant, we can't be 100% all the time. So try and keep those separate too. Okay, so we've talked about biosecurity and buying in calves. We're going to have a quick look at this calf to see what can I do to buy in a healthy calf to prevent him spreading disease. Let's have a look at this bull calf here. What are we looking at? Pneumonia is the biggest issue on farm for people who buy in calves. This guy breathing nice and easily, no heavy panting, clean tail, no drool, no wetness around the mouth, eyes bright, no runny eye, no nasal discharge out of the nose, in particular no snotty, gunky nasal discharge. And one thing that I suppose it's a tip from older farmers would note, if you want to seize a calf, okay, you pinch him around his trachea, around his windpipe, one quick pinch. If he's had pneumonia or he's under a little bit of pressure, he'll let out a cough, and you'll know then, okay, maybe this isn't the calf I want on my farm. Okay, so we had a quick look at how to avoid bringing in a potential sick calf into your herd. Now we're looking at the calf environment in the calf shed. Whether you're calving cows or whether you're calf to beef, it's pretty much the same. Here's where your calf ends up when he arrives onto your farm. So what are we thinking of? The first thing we're looking at is the deep straw bed they arrive into. This needs to be clean, it needs to be dry. And look, it might sound boring again, but the kneel test is the key. You get down on your knees, in the middle of the pen, you get back up again and you have a look and see are they wet. Mine are bone dry. It's dry here all the way down to the concrete. That's what you're looking at, because calves get into the deep straw and they nest and they snuggle up in it and they get the straw up around them. So if it's dry on top, super, but if it's wet underneath, well then your calf is actually lying in a wet environment, which is absolutely no good to them at all. While we're on the wet, and we'll talk about the cold, all these calves here, they're in the lap of luxury really. Calf jackets on, just overhead here, an infrared lamp, which they're not bothering with today because look, temperatures are pretty good. Calves, once the environmental temperature goes below 10 degrees, they start to burn energy off their own backs to try and keep warm. So it's very important, like realistically you're looking at up into April, there's going to be fluctuations in temperature, it's going to get really, really cold some nights, it's going to be warm some days. How do we keep them warm? Deep straw bed, infrared lamps, calf jackets and extra milk. We'll touch on the extra milk shortly. But again, we're back to if you don't measure, you don't know. Let's have a quick look here. I mean, Lidl's finest, your humidity and your temperature. Today it's 11.6. Ideal temperature for your calf to thrive in and to be comfortable in. And again, we're driving down infection pressure. Stress is one of the greatest avenues of the gateways for infection to come in. If calves are cold, they're going to be stressed. And while we're in the calving environment here as well, what else is going to stress them? Air movement, ventilation. What you want is a nice exchange of air, but not a draft. Again, we want to get down to calf level. Up here where we are, I can feel a slight movement of air. There's some doors open. It's a nice fresh day. But down at calf level, where I'm right down here beside them, there's no straw moving. This calf is nestled in nicely. There's no wind affecting him. There's no draft or there's no breeze affecting him. So he's not stressed, not cold. You couldn't ask for any better. Okay, we've had a look at our calves and how to keep them warm, how to keep them healthy, how to keep them happy. Let's talk about the most important thing of all, which is milk or milk replacer. I suppose to start, it's worth saying, calves grow on litres of milk. They don't go on guidelines or ideas, they grow on litres. So whether it's milk replacer or whole milk, you've got to give it to them for the calf to grow. And what are we looking at? Like the standard used to be 4.5, 5 litres a day. We all know now that's the bare maintenance. If the stress comes on, the temperature drops, we're up in litres. So your guidelines for milk replacer, 6.25, 5 litres a day. Your guidelines for whole milk, people are talking about feeding, I get away with 5, 6 litres. In reality, like the calves behind us that are born at 40 kilos, that are growing every day, the more milk you put into them, the better. These guys here are drinking 4 litres in the morning, 4 litres in the evening of whole milk, and they're not batting an eyelid. They'd take more if they got it. And I suppose the one concern everybody has is, farmers in particular, will we give them a scour by giving them too much milk? These calves are all less than 5 days old. Now is the time to push milk into them, because they're abomasum, where the milk goes in, it's nice and stretchy, it'll expand right now. So the more milk you put in there, the more the abomasum will expand, the more it'll allow it to hold later on. I suppose the mistake people make is they put them on a low amount of milk at the start. Next thing, all of a sudden, 3 weeks in, oh, it's starting to get cold, it's Paddy's day, temperatures are dropping, let's feed them an extra 2 litres. But that abomasum can't expand, the milk gets pushed through, the fats don't get digested properly, they get scoured. So it's not the milk that's caused the scour, it's the management 3 weeks earlier that's caused the scour. So if you want your calf to grow and grow well, and look at the price of calves this year, the more you put into them, the more you're going to get out of them. So the more milk you put in earlier the better, the more return on investment you'll get. Okay, we've talked about milk feeding, and look, I know it's early, but let's look 10, 12 weeks down the line when we're looking at weaning some of these calves, because it's a dirty word now, a dirty phrase, but let's talk about summer scour syndrome, how to avoid it possibly. Weaning is key, so we have to start working on weaning now, not in 10, 12 weeks time. And what do we need to work on weaning? We need fresh, clean water, access from the very, very get-go. If you think of the calf, 4 stomachs, the milk goes into the little one, the abomasum, everything else that it's going to eat, the concentrate, the forage, straw, that's all going into its big stomach, the rumen. And when it drinks water, that goes in there as well. It needs fresh water for the rumen to fill up a little bit, to get those bacteria going, to digest all that stuff. And look, the calves are going to start nibbling like this guy nibbling at straw already. Important to point out the difference between forage and roughage. This is roughage. Scratches the inside of the rumen, but there's no feed value in it really. It just gets the rumen to develop, gets the wall of the rumen scratched. Talk about roughage, that's the roughage. Talk about forage then, silage, dry silage, hay. When a calf eats some of that, it actually mimics what it's going to be doing with grass later on. It gets the rumen bacteria to start getting going, it kicks them off, so that when they get out to grass, it's not a shock to the system about what they're taking in. The rumen has already developed, they're eating that forage, the fatty acids are in there, the bacteria is there, the rumen environment is already there. The other thing I suppose worth mentioning about weaning is concentrate feeding. There's a focus, we need them on 1.5, we need them on 2 kilos when we wean them. I think we need to take a little step back, and it's more about the volume they can eat over the period of time before they wean, as opposed to building them up really, really quickly to weaning them on 2 kilos. So if these calves, they'll have access to concentrate tomorrow, 5 days old. They mightn't eat much, they'll nibble a little bit, but they have water as well. Their rumen is already starting. Replace it every day, fresh little bit of concentrate. By the time it comes to weaning these lads, they'll be well able to eat 2 kilos and more if they got it. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up, and I'm looking forward to questions with Tommy and Hannah after when we're finished. A couple of top tips, I suppose. Look, here we are 12 months later. This is what you're looking at, and this is what you're hoping for. Healthy, thriving, really, really good condition beef animals that you've bought and that you've reared yourself, and you've put a lot of effort and work and a lot of money into too, let's not forget that. So from a top tips point of view, here's some of the things that we want to start to concentrate on. Feed them enough of milk. You'll never ever ever get as good growth rates out of as little input as giving your calves extra milk when you buy them in. Talk to your vet, whoever your vet is, they know your farm. Talk to them about vaccination programs. Make sure you talk to them about biosecurity and the disinfectant you use, the proper one. Be brilliant at the boring stuff. Be brilliant at the hygiene. Brilliant at the bedding, nice straw bed. Remember back when we were looking at, be brilliant at keeping your calves warm and keeping them stress free. Because look, they're an investment, and the more you put into them now, the more likely you're to get really, really valuable animals like this in 12 months time.
But that was a brilliant video, Eamon, and thank you very much for taking time out on farm to give us that. I think it was a super overview of calf rearing. So Hannah, I'm hoping, I know you've had some internet challenges this evening, that you can hear me now.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Eamon. That was a brilliant video. Anything but boring. Very, very brilliant. But that as a slogan that I think I'm going to steal and share with as many people as I can summarises calf health in a nutshell to me. If you can get the basics right and the boring bits, you truly will have brilliant calf rearing. So yeah, absolutely love that. Thank you.
So Hannah, I have now got your presentation online, and I'm going to do you can instruct me, but listen, as I said at the start, it's a real pleasure to have you here. I knew of you, and I think I got to meet you for the first time at a veterinary conference in Killarney about 18 months ago now. Got to know each other quite well since then, but I was just blown away by your communication skills, passion for calf health and veterinary. So really excited to hear what you have to say. So you can tell me, instruct me when to move forward on slides, and the webinar is all yours.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So first of all, good evening, everybody. I appreciate if you're usually out on farm and being as busy as I know you all are, sometimes sitting in front of a computer screen. If you're anything like me, I do sometimes nod off a little bit. I've promised Tommy I will not do that this evening. But feel free to wander around, have a listen, you know, all the information on here. If you hit me up through either Instagram or pop me an email, so I'm Farm Vet Hannah, or ping me an email, I'll share that with you at the end. We can always have a chat at a separate time if there's any specifics, but hopefully some of the things I'll talk to you about this evening will maybe just give you one or two things to think about trying at home. So dairy to beef, top tips for success. I get the really amazing job of being able to work with both the producers who create our dairy cross beef calves. You know, since I graduated, the industry has made huge improvements in terms of using sex semen for heifer replacements, and now really capitalizing on the value that a dairy cross beef calf can bring. I get to work with the guys who create the calves, but then I get to work with the next step, so those integrated beef supply chains that really do create high quality products for the consumer. Because ultimately, I think it's really useful for us to remember, what are we trying to create? Well, we're trying to create a high quality, high welfare beef product for the end consumer. So what are my top tips for success? So Tommy, my glamorous assistant, if you could please move on to the next slide. Fantastic. What are we really trying to achieve when we're thinking about dairy cross beef calves? Well, the first thing for me is making sure that we capitalize on that genetic potential. Just like we think about capitalizing on the genetic potential of our heifer calves, we really should be doing doing the same with our dairy cross beef calves. You know, you look at what the likes of some of the semen companies are doing now in terms of investing in these animals to try and create a product that meets the consumer's needs. There are bulls, there are sires out there that if you speak to the people who are selling you semen, they can really help to advise on what will be best for you and your animals. So capitalizing on genetic potential, what else are we wanting to do? We want to maximize that feed efficiency. If we're going to be spending money and investing in these animals, we want to make sure we get the best return on investment possible. If we do that, we're hopefully going to maximize our growth. We're going to grow these animals as quickly and as efficiently as we can. Minimizing disease, obviously with my vet hat on, this is key. Making sure that we give that animal every possible chance by limiting things that could put a dampener on growth potential, so things like pneumonia and scour in particular. Making sure that we create an animal that we can finish efficiently. So, you know, we look at some of these targets now, and definitely by 21 months, having seen what some people can do with these dairy cross beef calves, we know there is the potential to go lower than that. And the final point on there is making sure that we minimize our wastage. For me, any animal lost out of this system really is a waste on our potential. So when we're thinking about these kinds of systems, we have the same old conundrum that we have no matter what part of calf rearing we're doing, and it's that fine balance that Eamon touched on between challenge and immunity. How much challenge have we got, and how much immunity can we give our calf? So as we move through these slides, what I'm hoping you'll be able to do is pick out some of the challenges, thinking about how you can mitigate them on your own farms, but also think about how we can optimize immunity. So if we click on Tommy, the very first thing to think about is sourcing considerations. So whether you are rearing your own dairy to beef, or if you are going out, you know, be it to the market or be it through private supply, your sourcing considerations really should be key. So first things first, what kind of genetics are going into these animals? What's the health status? So I've got BVD free on there, you know, making sure that we're not potentially going to bring in a persistently infected animal that's going to dampen the performance, not just of itself, but every other calf in there. So making sure you know that BVD status is critical. Other diseases that might be going on farm. So you can see here I've popped a picture of the old Bovivac S. So that's our salmonella vaccine, making sure that we know if there are issues on that farm, that we either are prepared for that or we actually choose to source our calves from somewhere else. And then the final picture at the bottom, maybe starting to ask some of those questions around colostrum. You know, what are these guys doing in terms of setting these animals up for the very best start? Because as you can see here, colostrum management is the single most important management factor in determining calf health and survival. Now, actually, if you're buying calves in, you have zero control over this. So making sure that you either find those things out or work really well with the vendors that are selling your calves is key. So if we click on, how do I know that it's the most important? Well, there's been vast arrays of studies. Loads of work has gone into this, and what you can see on this slide summarizes it quite nicely. Granted, it is data from a dairy farm, but you can see here that the analysis of over 4,000 calves was looked at on a US dairy farm. So coming to the slides below, you will see excellent, good, fair, or poor. Now, this is how passive transfer, so the transfer of those antibodies from the cow to the calf, were assessed. Excellent means that when you measure the total proteins on blood, you got a score of over 6.2. Good was 5.8 to 6.1. Fair was 5.1 to 5.7. And poor was less than 5.1. Now, Eamon touched on this really nicely in his video at the start. In order to know how good a job you're doing, sometimes we really do have to measure things. So particularly if you're in the thick of calving at the minute, getting your vet in, Tom, if you just want to flick back a slide, sorry, getting your vet in and making sure that they are potentially taking some blood samples and looking at what kind of passive transfer you are getting will tell you how well you're setting both your heifers and your beef cross dairy calves up for success. So the graph that you can see on the left shows that actually the poorer passive transfer that you get, so the less antibodies that make it across, the less likely you are to get no disease. So better passive transfer means less likely to get disease. The same can be said for pneumonia. And actually, when you look at that gap between the three, between kind of the excellent, good, fair and poor, it starts to really show that if we're only getting fair or poor passive transfer, there's a real risk of pneumonia there. In a lot of these dairy cross beef systems, particularly when it's buying from multiple sources, it is pneumonia that is the biggest thing we have to challenge, like with the biggest issue that we see without a shadow of a doubt. And then moving to this final slide, you can see that survivability is then very dependent as well. So if there's one thing we can feed back and one thing we can get right, it really is colostrum. So moving on to the next slide. Thanks, Tommy. Perfect. We've got this down to a fine art now, Tommy. I'm very impressed. So when I think about my job, supporting the beef supply chain that I work with is, an integral part of that is making sure that the calves that are supplied into it are as in good quality and top condition as possible. I'm supporting the dairy farmers that I work with. I know they want to create really good quality calves, because actually, if I know anybody, they want to be able to hold their head up high when a calf's in the market or when somebody buys something off them, knowing that they've done an amazing job. But, as is farming, sometimes these things can go wrong or we come against some challenges. And when we have that, what I do is I would go out to those supply farms and I would have a chat to them about where it may not be going well and where it may not or may not be going so well. So how can we score it? So the first thing for me is colostrum. So you can see here on the left, there's a number of questions we can ask ourselves. Again, it's all the things Eamon talked about. Are we measuring colostrum quality? What volume are we feeding? How quickly are calves getting it? How quickly are we harvesting it? And how clean is that feeding equipment? The higher the score, the better you're doing, and I usually score that out of 10. So have a quick look at that, have a think about what you're doing at home, and maybe score yourself out of 10. Are there potentially some easy wins there that could improve things for you? Moving on to the next one. We've thought about colostrum. We're now going to think about nutrition and feeding. So Eamon was bang on the money when he said that, feeding anywhere between 5 to 6 litres when I first graduated as well was pretty commonplace. We were all terrified about getting more milk or more milk replacer into our animals because of those things that he mentioned, thinking that, oh, it's just going to come through the back end. But ultimately, if you are feeding less than 6 litres, in my mind, that's just controlled starvation. These babies need nutrition, they need to develop, and this is one of the most feed efficient periods of an animal's life, so we want to capitalize on that as much as we can. So again, looking at the different questions we can ask ourselves here: how much milk replacer or milk are we feeding? Is that feeding equipment clean? Has the milk feeding been consistent? That forage and starter, have we got there from day zero? Why do we want it there? Well, that's going to drive our rumen development, as we'll come on to later. And have we got our clean fresh water available to help populate those microbes in the rumen and drive starter intakes? Moving on, I've scored nutrition and feeding. The next thing I would look at is infection pressure. And one of the biggest and highest challenges I see on farm actually comes from the calving yard. Most of those calf housing areas that I see are usually pretty clean. People acknowledge that we need to do good in do good disinfectant, but the calving yard time and time again is just a source of infection for our babies. So the quicker we can get the calf out of there, the very better. In addition to that, thinking about how we transport those calves, is it in a dirty bucket, making sure that it's clean, those kinds of things are going to be key. In terms of infection pressure on a farm, keeping our sick calves isolated would mean that you would score better. And whenever I go out to supply farms, I would always like to get a bit of a handle on how much pneumonia or scour is going on. So again, you could score yourself in those areas. So the final thing that I might look at would be housing. So moving on to the next slide. And when I think about housing, making sure that we keep as minimum an age range as possible really is key. Anything over 2 weeks is definitely going to give us some big risks. Eamon touched on, again, that calf nesting score, making sure that they can really nestle down in the straw and maintain their body heat, ensuring that there are no drafts at a calf level, making sure that those bedded areas are dry. And if we are having some bad weather, thinking about the extra things we can do to manage cold. As it was said, you know, the lower critical temperature of our calves, so that the temperature at which they start having to use energy to keep warm, and so that's energy that could be going into growth, is going to be from 10 degrees or less. So making sure that we think about the changes we can use will make us score better. So that's really just a bit of a summary of how we can assess our sourcing farms. The next thing we need to think about is starting right. So there's a couple of pictures I chose here to summarize this. If you imagine these babies, if you're buying in from multiple sources, they have got one hell of a journey. It's a bit like you or I trying to run a marathon. I am no athlete. I am somewhat sedate. I would be absolutely shattered. And in addition to that, it's a bit like when we send our kids to nursery. There's so many different bugs that they're going to be exposed to. So we really want to make sure that we kind of give them that really nice integration into our farms, and we support them as well as we can. So moving on to the next slide, there's some real tips and tricks that I think if you take nothing away from tonight other than this, I'll feel like I've done my job really. And it's not just because it's one of the products that Tommy is so passionate about. So electrolytes. Electrolytes are probably single-handedly one of the best products you could have on any farm. Be that calves or be that cows, electrolytes simply work miracles. So if you imagine these baby calves, you know, they may have had a 2-hour journey, they may have had slightly longer, they may have had, you know, mixing with lots of different groups. Getting some electrolytes in will enable them to sort out their electrolyte balance, and is most likely going to give them a real boost and help them then start taking the milk feed when you offer it. What I like to do after calves have had journey is mix up large volumes of this. So I'd probably mix up about 10 litres in buckets and leave it in the pens. You would be amazed how many times you go back the next morning and you find that those buckets are completely empty. Making sure that they can really sort out that electrolyte balance is key. And if we do that, they're then most likely to feed. And actually, what do we want them to do? We want them to get some good nutrition into themselves as quickly as possible. So moving on to the next slide. Why are we bothered about nutrition? Well, when we think about the pre-weaned calf, I always think it's worth remembering why we give them what we do. So as soon as I put any feed in front of them, I want them to do 3 things with it. The very first thing is maintenance. So when I say maintenance, what I mean there is the energy requirements just to move, to breathe, to exist, for all those bodily functions to happen. That maintenance requirement is usually going to stay pretty, is kind of going to be needed no matter what we put into that calf. It's something that we can't change. So whatever energy we put in, we need to account for the maintenance need, and then anything that's left over is going to be able to give us that growth. So we're going to have our growth coming from that, and in addition to that, I often reflect and think that actually immunity may also form a part of that. Then our third goal when we're feeding that pre-weaned calf is rumen development. So despite the lovely picture of the milk powder and the milk here, we know that actually our milk feed has no role on that. Our rumen development is going to come from our starter feed. We're going to have to create and introduce a microbial population. We want to increase that rumen volume with our kind of scratch factor and forage, like Eamon talked about, and we want to increase the absorptive capacity of the rumen. So moving on to the next slide. One thing people will often ask me is, which milk powder should I feed? So for me, No matter what you feed, whoever you buy it from should be able to answer all the questions that you have. And if they can't, it would make me be a little bit suspicious. So just some top tips when you're looking at a milk powder label. When you look here at the composition, the feed ingredients are generally listed in the order of inclusion. So you can see here skimmed milk powder is highest up the list, which tells me that actually that's the highest inclusion ingredient. The next thing to look for would be things like our crude protein. So coming across to the analytical constituents on the left side of that label, crude protein percentage is important. What the percentage doesn't tell us is what kind of protein that is or how digestible it is, but it's a really good baseline for just how much is there. We'll also have our oil percentage there. And again, that usually, I'll come on to kind of the amounts you need, but that you would hope would be over 20%. Crude fibre would be the next value that you might see. Ash percentages on there. Now, ash is created when our milk effectively is heated, and it is a byproduct of how hot it is heated. So the higher the ash, what it usually tells us is that milk has had to be heated hotter for a shorter period of time, which means it's effectively cheaper for the factory to do, which often might indicate that it's a slightly poorer quality powder. So really looking at ash, if there's a lot in it, it's probably not the best powder out there. We want to make sure that there's obviously vitamin A, D and E in our powders, and also copper and selenium. You can usually see all those further down the label as you have a nosy. So moving on to the next slide. Key considerations, so key things I'd be looking for. Crude protein content. In an ideal world, we might be over 23%, but as long as we're kind of 20% or above, I would usually be pretty happy. Dairy proteins are key. And this is really important because calves less than 3 weeks of age can't digest non-dairy proteins. We've seen some real challenges with that in the past. So making sure that the proteins we are putting into the calves can be used is really important. So crude fat, we want that to be anywhere between 20 and 25%. So some of those newer powders that you're seeing coming onto the market now are more like a 25% powder, 25% fat powder. This is to kind of mimic that cow's milk, if you like. And actually, if you think about it, fat is where we get our energy. And what do we know our little baby cows need? Well, they need energy. So making sure that it is at least a minimum of 20, but actually I'm starting to favour those higher fat powders now. Crude fibre, so we want to make sure that there's less than 0.15%. If it's high fibre, probably suggests we've got a lot of plant proteins, and as I said before, calves can't digest these as well as your dairy proteins, which they can use from birth. Ash content, we want that to be less than 7.5%, and sodium less than 0.8%. So moving on to the next slide. A lot of people will ask me, should I get a whey-based protein powder or should I get a skim powder? And actually, I don't have a strong opinion on this. So things to think about are whey powders are digestible in the small intestine. The manufacturing process will affect the digestibility. So not all whey ingredients are equal. I'm going to come on to this afterwards because I think this is a really key point, that if you are looking at it and you think that, you know, whey protein isolate is the same as whey powder, there are slight differences and nuances that we need to be aware of in terms of how much protein that will give to our calves. And then skim powders. So skim powders can be great in that they form a clot in the abomasum. So this can sometimes slow down the digestion of these powders. If you are on a little bit of a knife edge and you're worrying about those scours, sometimes the skim powders can give you a little bit more of a margin of error, which means that that switch can just make life a little bit easier. So if you're having challenges like that, think about maybe trying a skim as opposed to a whey powder. We need to be careful when we're looking at that in terms of on the label where it is, because there's no legal limit on the inclusion of percentage skim. So again, whoever you're buying your powder from, make sure you ask those questions. If it's less than 5%, it's probably going to be a weaker clot that is formed, which can sometimes be a little bit detrimental to calf health. So moving on. As I said before, not all whey is the same. So really making sure we look at that ingredients list, like I said. So if we have whey protein concentrate or whey protein, this is going to be our best source. It's got the highest protein content at about 35%. So it's going to be the most similar to our skim milk powder. Next best, or kind of slightly lower, would be our delactosed whey or our whey powder low in sugar. So some of the lactose has been removed here, and then we might replace that with ash. It's got protein of about 25%. And then the very worst and the lower one that, to be honest, is usually put in as a lactose source, not always just a protein source, would be our whey powder or whey powder low in protein. So yeah, lots of lactose there, and is our lowest crude protein with about 10 to 15% protein there. So moving on to the next slide. I've popped this in because there's been a lot of feedback when I've been on farm about navel sucking between calves. So I think there's always an opportunity when we think about milk feeding to talk about teats. So hopefully you'll notice, looking at this image, the difference in the size of the holes in each of those teats. And actually what that means is that the drinking speed is going to be pretty different. So if we look at the milk bar teat on the end here, that's going to deliver around 400 ml per minute of milk, versus if we look at that white teat on the right hand side, that's going to be about 900 ml per minute. So what we can sometimes end up is a situation where if we've got that wider bore hole, the calves just guzzle and guzzle and guzzle and drink really, really quick. We probably don't produce quite as much saliva either, which can sometimes be a bit of a bad thing. And often those calves, that satiation, that kind of trigger that says, actually, I'm full, my belly's full and I'm pretty happy, won't kick in. So if you are having challenges with things like navel sucking, or you think you're getting a little bit of bloat that might be secondary to ruminal drinking, thinking about which teats you are using and feeding is really key. It might be that actually changing to a slightly different teat will mean you have better results. Your calves drink a bit slower, but actually they are generally more satisfied and happy. So it's just one of those little tips and things to think about. So moving on to the next slide. Obviously, we've talked about our milk feeding, but when we've got these calves in the pre-weaning period, rumen development really is key. So as Eamon said, water, wonderful water. And when I say water, I really do agree that it must be clean. You know, if it's not clean, we've got dirty biofilms in there. You know, we know that mycoplasma will survive for about 60 days in a biofilm. That could be a source of infection if we're not careful. Making sure we clean those buckets and keep that nice and fresh is key. And that's going to help drive our starter intake. So our starter pellets, like in the picture seen on the right. So whenever I think about baby calves, if you don't mind just clicking on, Tommy, that'd be ace. Thank you. I always think that what we're effectively trying to do is to take a little mini piglet, where actually our calves, they don't really have a rumen that's that functional. They just have that big abomasum, that true stomach to start with. And we want to develop them and support them to enable that rumen to grow, to increase in size and functionality, to mean that when they do move on to either that forage-based diet or the grass-based diet, that rumen can cope with what we're putting in front of them and use it for energy and for growth. So moving on to the next slide, this is what happens at a kind of at an organ level when we're looking at the rumen based on what diet is going into them. And I'm sure if you are any kind of calf fan, you'll have seen pictures like this time and time again. So you can see here on the left, our milk only diet, there's pretty much a really flat, smooth surface. In terms of surface area, that's not as good as it could be. Milk and hay, maybe a tiny little bit better. Just it looks like it's a little bit more stretched, a little bit bigger in size. But the real absolute champion is this milk and grain diet. We can see here that those rumen papillae have really developed. They've increased in size. This organ is going to be so well developed and function to cope with that diet. And it really is that starter that we need to drive that. So as soon as we can get it into them, as palatable as we can make it, as appealing as we can make it, really is key. So thinking about what's in our starter feed, moving on to the next slide, we're going to have different ingredients in there for different reasons. So again, I want to give you a caveat. I am no nutritionist, so make sure you chat to your nutritionist about this. But thinking about our energy ingredients, such as our kind of wheat, sorghum, maize, barley, wheat feed, oats, rice and maize gluten, thinking about things that might be in there from a protein component, but ultimately a product that is going to be palatable and is going to drive intakes is really going to help and support us there. There are some things that we should have as a baseline, you know, minimum 16% protein, a high starch pellet is really going to help again develop that rumen, which is what we want. Making sure it's clean, well presented, and little and often, you know, I sometimes see these these feed troughs that are really big and full. But if you think about it, 70% of it at the bottom is a bit like waste. You know, those calves don't want to eat it. when I have a roast dinner, I want to have a nice fresh roast dinner on a clean plate. I don't want to eat one that's been on a plate that's been sat on the side for 2 days, or one that somebody else has already had a bit of a nibble at. Our calves are no different, so little and often really is key. Also making sure that there's plenty of space. There's been a lot of farms where I've been that actually kind of some of the blockers to that really good rumen development are just accessible feed space. And it's not those big calves that you'll notice the issues with, it's those kind of little babies that might hang back a little bit. So yeah, giving as much space as possible really is a useful thing. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Take some of your blue barrels, cut them in half and whack them on some posts, and suddenly you've got a nice big area for a load of calves to feed round. They can be easily disinfected, they can be moved around the pens. You know, cheap and simple solutions work just as well as fancy shiny things. So moving on to the next slide. Feed plans and weaning. So for me, I'm in complete agreement with Eamon that we should be feeding at least 3 litres twice a day. Whenever we're filling a unit, so if you're buying in from multiple sources, you're obviously going to have the stress of movement, the stress of mixing, and sometimes the stress of a diet change. So for that reason, there are a couple of units where I would recommend starting at a slightly lower rate just to build up. In all honesty, though, I think in reality, you can usually start at least 3 litres twice a day. Once you've got a full unit, you can then feed. Usually I would have them on that for at least, you know, on these units that are kind of 6 weeks on milk, 6 weeks weaned, I would suggest at least 3 weeks on 6 litres, 6 litres a day. And then the weaning process really should be gradual. What we're starting to notice as an industry now is that that short weaning period isn't going to be appropriate for enabling that kind of overall intake of starter feed that Eamon talked about. Just getting in, say, 1.5 kilos for 1 day really isn't enough. What we want to know is that we've had prolonged exposure to that concentrate in the starter pellet to get really good rumen development. So you can see here what we're proposing is a 3-week wean, no matter which program you're on, whether that's a normal or an elevated plane. So moving on to the next slide. Hygiene, if you just want to go back one, Tommy. Hygiene really is essential. So hopefully nobody recognises these kind of pictures. So you can see here, dirty milk bar. You know, I'd be pretty upset if somebody served a milkshake to me in that. And those teats. Teats can be an absolute pain in the backside to clean, in all honesty. So thinking about pipe cleaners, thinking about regular changing, making sure that we can take them off occasionally and really get into them to give them a real good clean, because quite frankly, not only is that a breeding ground for all those bugs that might cause us issues with bacteria, with scour, that kind of thing, mycoplasma is going to absolutely love that. And as Tommy said at the very start, it's one of those things that we are seeing in increasing numbers. So yeah, making sure we can do everything we can from a hygiene perspective. Clicking on to the next slide. If you happen to have milk machines, they can be brilliant. But equally, if all 288 of us signed on this evening drank from the same pint pot, I don't think it'll be long before you all caught the cold that I've just been getting over. And the same is said for your milk machines. So for me, irrespective of whether that milk machine says that it has a cleaning component and it can disinfect itself, I would be rotating that at least once every 12 hours, sitting it in a nice pot here of sodium hypochlorite and giving it a rinse. So this is just a nice little Persil tablet tub, which means it can be closed, it can be kept out of the muck, and disinfectant can be in there. Thinking again about your milk machines in terms of drainage, obviously, you know, lots of saliva is going to be produced, a bit of milk, lots of fluids. We want to make sure that that drains and stays really clean to keep the infection pressure down on our baby calves. So just clicking on. What should we be using? So this was a study done by Bobby Hyde, who is a bit of a god, in my opinion, when it comes to calf things and all things cows. And what it did was compare cleaning protocols. It was for colostrum equipment, but the same can be said for our calf feeding equipment. What you can see here on the left is the total bacterial count, so just how many bugs were there. And it's pretty simple. If it's hot water, it's going to do a better job than cold. I'm moving on to the next slide. And if we use hypochlorite or peracetic, we're going to get far superior responses and lower bacterial numbers than if we use our parlour washings or water. So for me, we really should be thinking about using hypochlorite or peracetic acid. I'm a big fan of hypo. It's an alkaline detergent that I really like, similar to Milton, which means it's also really good against mycoplasma. Clicking onto the next slide. And if we're going to think about our gold standard cleaning protocol, well, first, we're going to rinse with lukewarm water. If we go too hot, we're going to leave that biofilm there. And what does our biofilm do? Well, it's a bacterial breeding ground. It also, mycoplasma absolutely loves it. So making sure we do that warm rinse first, just to get that physical milk off, is going to be key. Then a nice hot soapy water wash, like Eamon said, fairy liquid is as good as anything. Give it a real good scrub and make sure you get your brush in and physically disrupt that biofilm. Then the alkaline detergent, so here we've got sodium hypo or Milton. Give it a nice rinse in cold water, and if possible an acid rinse after this, and again rinse it with cold water. Now that's the gold standard. I appreciate in real life it might not be the easiest thing to do, so what are the key bits? First is your biofilm, so give it a lukewarm rinse. Next is your alkaline detergent, and then rinse and dry. So for me, making sure we maybe have that 3-step process in place is key. Moving on to the next slide. So how do we know how good a job we do? This is one of my favourite bits of kit. If you are a vet on the call this evening, I would highly encourage you to invest. If you are a farmer, I would ask you to ask your vets to invest, because for me, there is no better tool for giving us an answer on how good a job of cleaning we're doing. So this little machine on the left measures something called surface ATP. So what that is effectively the amount of kind of pathogen or bug energy there is on a surface. So the RLU stands for relative light units, and effectively what happens is when you swab a surface, like you can see on the right here, you pop it in your little machine, you press a number, does a really cool countdown like Harold Vorderman, keeps you on the edge of your seat, and the lower the number, the better the job you're doing. So be it colostrum harvesting buckets, be it colostrum feeding equipment, be it milk feeding buckets, be it the milk taxis that you mix your milk in, we can assess how clean that is. And for me, what we should be doing really is aiming for less than 200 RLU. So you can see here, this was actually a piece of colostrum feeding equipment that was measured. What's happened here is this calf has probably been inoculated with bugs from the very start. Whenever I think about calf rearing, I always think about controlling the controllables, and you know, Eamon sums it up as the boring but brilliant. Cleanliness is a key part of that. If you get your cleaning right, you're going to give yourself the best success you can. So moving on, environmental considerations. So we're thinking about that housing that our little babies are in now. And for me, the 3 things that we need to think about, firstly, are moisture. Moisture promotes bacterial growth and helps it move around. Our bugs love moisture. In addition to that, it absorbs energy. If you think about yourself on a really dry, crisp, cold day versus a dank, grey, rainy day, I actually find I'm a lot warmer on, you know, the temperature might be lower, but because I'm not damp and wet, I don't feel like I'm having to use as much energy. When we've got too much moisture, and we see it in our calves, it increases that lower critical threshold and temperature, which means actually, whilst calves might usually only need it to be 10 degrees to start using energy, if we're too damp, that will be raised and they'll start, you know, having to use energy at higher temperatures. So reducing the moisture as much as we can really is important. The next thing to think about is airspeed. So if we've not got enough airspeed, we're not going to have fresh air. You know, you might see it that you've got cobwebs in your shed, or it might be that the air just feels quite thick, or it almost smells funky. You know, you sometimes walk in and you can really smell it. Too much airspeed though, and we're going to have to use energy to keep warm. So we want that fine balance, like Eamon touched on, of fresh air coming in, but no drafts at a calf level. And that airspeed needs to be just right. And again, coming on to that last point, lack of fresh air. Well, our lack of fresh air, it's going to increase the survival time of those bugs, and it can reduce oxygen concentrations. So thinking about what you can do to minimize moisture, optimize your airspeed, and think about your air freshness is key. So I like to put this slide on because I often say to people, where do you think you're most likely to pick up the flu? Now, for me, what this makes me think about is how much space do we give those calves, and it's often a really simple but overlooked thing. The solution to pollution is dilution when it comes to calf bugs. And actually, whilst the red tractor requirements for a calf on milk might only be 1.8 metres, I would be advocating that we should be closer to 2.5 metres really, particularly if we're buying them from multiple sources. Giving our calves more space will give them that freedom of movement. It'll mean there's slightly less competition, but it also means that those bug levels are going to stay slightly lower and more controllable. So moving on. Whenever I think about calf sheds, as much as vets do sometimes like to spend money, I have said it, there are areas where I think we can save money and make really simple modifications. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, dead simple, little bit of wire fencing on some, just some chains tied to the side. That means during the winter, these can be flopped down, straw can be put on top that can be bedded with, but it creates these little micro environments for calves to huddle together to stay warm. Some other things that we could do are think about kind of putting rubber matting over concrete areas. If you've ever sat your backside on a concrete panel, it gets numb pretty quickly, and calves are no different. They love lying against something solid. Well, let's make that something solid, something warm, be it a straw bale or be it rubber sheeted concrete, things like that. Looking at the picture on the right here, you can see that actually from an airflow perspective, when it's sunny and when it's warm, you know, this was down south, having those sides open works really well. But at this time of year, when we had some real change in weather, actually blocking that off but making it that we could change it depending on time of year worked really well in this shed. So moving on. The one thing to think about whenever we're thinking about calves, and if we're taking in batches, is disinfection. If anybody's had a cocci outbreak, it can be pretty depressing. Crypto is exactly the same, and we want to make sure that we're using a product that is going to kill these really pesky bugs that have a horribly hard shell. So making sure we're using something at an appropriate mixing rate, and also that we're leaving it on for long enough. So I usually advocate for at least 4 hours. Things like your Kenocox, your Killcox, and your Cyclex are really good. And yeah, giving the key thing, I guess, with that is you cannot disinfect muck. So the first thing is make sure you physically get rid of the muck, and then we pop our disinfectant on. But it is a real key step, I think, if you're doing any form of calf rearing. So moving on to the next slide, the key things to remember from our environment are think about your fresh air. Moisture management is going to be critical. The solution to pollution is dilution. And think about those easy wins you can do on your farm. Maybe those little micro environments. It might be that actually, you know, putting a straw bale against a concrete wall to make sure that the calves aren't huddling against something cold. They'll probably be easy wins on your farm. The other thing I'd say is you don't always spot them yourself. So going and visiting other people and stealing their best ideas is a really nice way of, knowledge sharing throughout the industry. So moving on. Immunity. So I talked about challenge versus immunity. The key thing for immunity is obviously going to be good nutrition. That is a given. But what other tools do we have in our armour? So when I think about calf rearing, and particularly the dairy to beef model, I'd say the biggest challenge that we contend with is pneumonia. You know, all those mixing of different ages, different groups, whilst we try to keep it as narrow as we can, it does mean sometimes bugs pass between them. I want to give a caveat to this, that whatever farm you are from, speaking to your own vet about your own challenges is key. Quite a lot of the pharmaceutical companies will support investigations. Thinking about testing and finding out what's going on is important. The big things to think about with our pneumonia are usually our viruses, so particularly our RSV and PI3. Intranasal vaccine can transform that and really can work well. In addition to that, I've assumed that we're going to be BVD free, but later down the line, things like our IBR, we may also want to consider. And then in addition to that, we may have bacterial component vaccines, so things like our Bovipast, so protecting against our manhaemias, whether or not we choose to use a Histophilus vaccine. And obviously we now have the Mycoplasma vaccine over in the UK that we can use. So I would say, for me, you want a robust vaccine policy that probably protects against some of the key viruses with or without a bacterial component, depending on what your personal challenge is. And then think about the other tools you can use to improve that kind of vaccine response. You know, if you're buying in from multiple sources, it might mean that you don't know the mineral status of these animals. So tools like Multimin can also be really helpful and something to think about. So moving on to the next slide. The one thing I would say, and I hope you can take away from tonight, is even if there's just 1 or 2 things that you think about doing differently in your own units, is it's the power of tiny gains. If you continually just to try and be that tiny bit better every single day, these really do add up. And some of the transformations I've seen on some of these calf rearing units in as little as 6 months have been incredible. You know, we're talking about almost halving antibiotic usage. We're talking about daily live weight gains consistently over 0.9 kilograms in the pre-weaning period and up at 1.1, 1.2 kilograms post-wean. It really does make a difference, and there really is, by getting those boring but brilliant bits right, you really do see a return on investment. And so to move on to the final slide. after tonight, if I was to tell you to do anything, the first thing would be source right. Be that if you're buying in, making sure you know what you're getting and where you're getting it from, or if you're rearing your own dairy beef animals, making sure that you get the start right really is key. Set yourself some clear goals. Think about what you want to achieve and what's important to you. Have a bit of a reflection on what we've talked about tonight and what will work well for you on your own systems. And then finally, whatever you are doing, please, please look at your data. If we don't measure what we're doing, we don't know how to improve it. So that would be a key step for me that you should be thinking about. So yeah, thank you very much.
That was absolutely brilliant, Hannah. Fantastic presentation. No surprises there. So many nuggets of wisdom to digest, and you absolutely flew through it, and it was really, really good. And I mean flew through it in a good way. So some interesting stuff there, I think, from a questions point of view. So a couple of things, just to remind people, Eamon's video, if there was issues with audio or sound, we'll be sharing that with all attendees tomorrow. Hannah, that image of the two bars, I know the bar on the top looked a little bit busy, but it looked a little bit more fun. Sorry, that's probably not what the message of the that was supposed to be delayed, but no, I just think really, really interesting. And I've seen you again, we've done a video series with you with your luminometer. It's a really interesting tool. So I'd ask people to keep the questions coming in. So I am now going to just, before we go to questions, do a little quick presentation on precision microbes. So hopefully this will work. Because just a quick 5 minutes on precision microbes. And once again, just thanks to Eamon and Hannah for super presentation. So just a little bit of background for those of you who don't know precision microbes. We're a Dublin-based biome and health solutions company, licensed manufacturer, organic certified, and since we started 5 years ago in the animal health space, we're exporting to 12 countries. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about our unique pro and postbiotic liquids and their role in calf health. Again, I'm, like the other two speakers, really passionate about calf health, I think, and I have some simple principles that will probably echo throughout. So if we're all saying the same things, they probably tend to be important things. You know, when we look at calf health, rearing system, there's three kind of pillars for me: the calf, the immunity. I think it was covered off so well by the other speakers on feeding in particular, the environment in the calf. Hannah did cover that off. And I think people and routines as well, having good routines around calf rearing that work for you. I often say comparison is the thief of joy, but you know, looking at systems that work and making it work and visiting other farms is very useful. Again, everybody's talking about the seesaw, but it is really important. You know, ultimately with calf health, we're trying to balance immunity and infection pressure. We're trying to drive up immunity and we're trying to drive down infection pressure. And that's where precision microbes comes in, I suppose, on the immunity piece. Just quickly on dairy to beef as well, just to echo some of the things that came through. Source farm is so important. We have a lot of calves coming at the present time. Calves are expensive at the moment. Sourcing the right calves is really critical. Some of the things I see is the first 24 to 48 hours is so important for the calf. And it's simple. It's being the basic stuff, the boring stuff, you know, a warm, dry lie, getting fresh air and space. They're so simple, but if we can consistently do that, I say to people, imagine in Ireland here, it's the Farmer's Journal or the Farmer's Guardian is coming to take a picture of calves the next morning. How much straw would you have in there? That's how much you need. Again, milk feeding, I echo what the others have said around milk feeding, and there's a lot of questions that come in relation to that as well. Hydration can be a particularly useful tool, particularly with transport, and calves love consistency. Again, a simple tip for calf rearing is that if you're feeding with milk bars, I'd have a milk bar per pen and keeping them clean. You're not transferring diseases like mycoplasma in that oral route. Again, echoing the water piece, water is really key. Clean water. I saw it on a farm recently. They were cleaning their water troughs out daily. Real attention to detail, but it also noticed that feed intake had gone up because we're trying to drive that rumen health. Ultimately, vaccines, minerals, microbes, these are all tools we can use. I'm incredibly biased when it comes to microbes, but these are tools. We've got to get the basics right. Just quickly on dairy to beef, where does precision microbes fit in? Well, we think about this gut health piece, and this is, I think, favorable for us, and it's why I'm so excited about this area. The whole knowledge in gut health in humans and animals is exploding. We know that the gut microbiome, these microbes in the gut, are really important. If we flip it then and we look at the dairy to beef calf, transport, mixing, which increases infection pressure, new diets, new sheds, stress, they're all impacting gut health. And ultimately with beef calves, it's about performance. So we're thinking about performance, average daily gain. And when we think about performance, we spend a lot of time thinking about digestion, or sorry, feed input, but we have to remember that that feed has to be digested to drive that output. So gut health is really important for that perspective. Also, the digestive system has over 70% of the immune system, and that's a function of the size of the gut. So if we can keep digestion and immune function right, it really helps. And again, stress and pathogens in dairy to beef systems, no matter how much there's always that element of stress. So where Precision Microbes is designed as a tool at 30 mils daily to improve gut resilience. We always get asked about trial work, and we've lots and lots more trial work on calves. It's an independent trial done that was recently published. And what this just shows, the top slide is the scour scoring chart. There was 50 calves in the trial, 25 in the control, 25 in the treatment group, and less scour scoring on calves on microbes. So these are younger calves. But again, one of the things during a scour outbreak we see consistently, and this data shows it from the trial as well, calves stay drinking. And that's a really important function when we think about health and time. Again, when it comes to dairy to beef, this was an independent trial done a long 3 years ago now, maybe 4 years ago when we started in Waterford. And over that trial period, we saw significant differences in the treatment and control group in average daily gain. Now, does every farm get this? No, there's variables there, but we do consistently see improved growth rates in calves. So just to keep the protocol simple, again, I suppose I've been very lucky, and I've worked with Eamon and Hannah around microbes as well. But recently we started working in France, and on the top is Olivier Crenn. He's a well-known French vet, and he's a bit like me. He's put the product into his farms for the last 6 months. And I suppose what he likes is the farmers could see a difference in calves. And I think that to me is a really important thing, aside from data, that people can see a response to the product. So when we think about dairy to beef systems, what are the protocols? So there's lots more information tonight, and I love talking, but I don't want to go on too much, and I want to really take advantage of our expert speakers. But we have developed this unique recovery liquid product, HydroStem, and that can be used on arrival, and then our 30 mils daily for 30 days or up to weaning as a supportive tool to gut health, remembering to top up with an extra 30 mils during digestive upsets, or if there's pneumonia outbreaks for 3 to 4 days, and hydration as well. Again, if we think about if you're looking and facing disease challenges, you can use Precision Microbes as well as HydroStem as part of that digestive upset protocol. It's a liquid electrolyte. It mixes 200 mils to 2 liters of water, but it can be group fed. So what we often see is groups of calves sick. And this is a really exciting product that we've been working on and have released now currently in the Irish market, but will be in the UK market in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So look, that's a little bit about Precision Microbes. I think really good tools. Again, if you have questions, specific questions about Precision Microbes, where you can get it, etc. If you're tuning in from outside of Ireland, info@precisionmicrobes.com. Again, we'll be sharing lots of details with all of everybody on the webinar. So we'll move on to questions, and thank you very much again to our speakers. So Eamon and Hannah, we will welcome both of you back, and hopefully Wi-Fi's are working, and I can hopefully see you and you can see me, and Aidan will stop sharing my screen. And I know already there's a number of questions have come in. Okay, Eamon, I can see you, and Hannah, are you leaving your camera off with your Wi-Fi issues?
Well, I might turn it on at the very end just to give you all a quick wave, but I don't want to break it, so we'll just keep it to mysterious at the moment, I think, Tommy.
If anybody is based in the UK and have family members that are in the broadband business, Hannah is a willing and able customer. She needs to look at her broadband. Okay, Eamon, I suppose first of all I go to you, because we've been speaking to Hannah. You're in the middle of spring here in the seasonal system in Ireland. I suppose first of all, what's happening on the ground in spring, you might tell us before we get into questions.
It's, I suppose, the same as every spring, Tommy. Lots of cabins, lots of milk fevers, and the last maybe 2 days, 3 days, we've started to see the first of the sick calves coming online. Bits of pneumonia and some scour as well. So predictably, with the weather we're having here, we had 52 days of rain or something. Somebody told me there recently. So just miserable outside. All the animals still in the shed. The predictable level of sickness is starting to creep up over the last few days too.
Okay, so Eamon, if we look, and Hannah, there's a couple of questions, and I'll go to both of you for answers. A lot of them actually, I'm just looking through them here, and that's why I was missing my cue sometimes, Hannah, to move forward. I was trying to read the questions as well, and I'm not good at multitasking. Good few questions around this topic, and it's based back to the dairy farm. If a calf will suck a speedy feeder and take 4 litres of colostrum itself, is that better than stomach tubing them? So I'll go to you first, Eamon, and then get Hannah's opinion on that.
It's all got to do what suits your own system, Tommy, I would say, personally. If you've got the time to let a calf suck 4 litres from a speedy feeder, well, obviously that mimics the sucking a little bit better than just stomach tubing. So that's the ideal scenario. I suppose in Ireland in particular, we're hyper aware now about just how condensed the calving pattern is, and instead of like 1 calf a day or 1 calf every 2 days, where it might be in parts of the UK, we're getting 20, 40 calves a day on some farms. So I mean, the luxury of being able to spend some time with a speedy feeder, letting the calf suck, just doesn't exist. The labour doesn't exist. So I suppose in an ideal world, that absolutely, yeah, if you can get the calf to, if you can spend the time with the calf and get him to suck the teat properly, and the colostrum goes straight into the abomasum, the groove closes over, super. But in reality of our, I suppose, intense calving systems here, we're trying to get colostrum into the calf. So the second best is the stomach tube. As far as I'm concerned, it's whatever works in your system. The key is to get the 4 litres of good quality colostrum into the calf. If you have the time, yeah, absolutely let him suck. If time is an issue, don't cut corners, just get it tubed in. At least it's in the calf. The quicker the better.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with Eamon on that one, Tommy. Complete agreement. Whatever works for you and whatever guarantees that 4 litres in. The other key thing, I guess, to mention around if you are going to tube it is please invest in 2 tubes and have one for your sick calves that get electrolytes and one for your colostrum, and make sure the 2 never cross.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Next question is around, and I think we all have kind of a similar pattern on milk feeding, but tried upping milk from the start, but calves leave the milk behind them. Any tips to increase their intake? They're on 6 litres, total 3 litres AM, 3 litres PM. So that particular farm is struggling to go up in milk feeding. You mentioned it, Eamon, in your video, the elasticity of the abomasum of the young calf. So I also probably want to caveat that and ask you both the same question, that when you're buying in a calf at 2 to 3 weeks of age, increasing milk feeding and the risks around that. But let's start on any tips from either of you on that farm who's trying to feed more milk but calves are leaving after them.
Do you want to let Hannah go first and we'll alternate rather than one of us going?
Yeah, do
that. So Hannah.
So I guess the thing that I don't quite know from what's been said so far is if that is whole milk or milk replacer. If it's milk replacer, thinking about the grams per litre is obviously pretty important. So whenever we think about the grams of milk replacer in our litres when we feed it, I probably would never go over 150 grams per litre, just because otherwise we're going to affect the osmolality. So if you think about it, the concentration of that, and if we go too high, that will, it'll have a detrimental impact on abomasal health, but also it might be a reason that we can't get more into them. Top tips for thinking about increasing intakes: think about the split. What time you're feeding calves. You know, if you're feeding them at 8 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you are going to struggle because we've not got an even time split. I'll be honest with you, and it's not just a shameless plug, Tommy, but I've really been impressed with how Precision Microbes drives intakes. I think actually adding that to the product has been, adding that to milk and milk replacer has been really useful for keeping calves drinking. And I think just gradually stress testing it, yeah, just keep eking it up where you can. But yeah, I'm making sure it's just clean and nice. You know, dirty buckets are going to be an instant thing that turn calves off. You know, they are sensitive little creatures at the end of the day.
Eamon, any comments?
Yeah, agree with all that. I suppose what I'd add to it, and it's only a brief thing, is 2 things. One would be consistency from a time point of view, especially what Anna said. But 2 would be temperature. We've worked with some farms where they had issues maybe with intakes and driving intakes, and some of the issues were just that the milk, by the time the calves were getting it, was gone that little bit colder, and they just didn't want to finish it out. I mean, if you can work on temperatures, especially with milk replacer, and even outside of intakes, from the point of view of making sure that milk, especially if you're mixing it yourself and not through a feeder, and even with a feeder, make sure it's calibrated and the temperature is right, because sometimes if temperatures are a little bit low, they're not as keen to finish out the intakes they're given.
Okay, brilliant. 2 practical approaches. Warming milk, again, it's easy probably rare calves on a webinar. So, but it is something I'd agree with you. It comes out of the teat at 37 degrees. Nature doesn't make mistakes. Question on the environment to calf houses. I'll go to you first, Eamon. How to lower humidity in the calf shed? And I've seen a lot of this actually. So have the Yorkshire boarding, have open roof peaks. I know we can't see the farm, no leaks, but humidity is still always at about 80%. So I suppose this leads into maybe mechanical ventilation. What's your thoughts if you're constantly struggling with humidity? And maybe explain to people why humidity is a risk as well, Eamon.
Well, I suppose humidity is a risk purely because bacteria and viruses absolutely love a little bit of moisture and they love the heat. So the higher the humidity, the easier it is to pass from one calf to another. Any viruses you have, any bugs you've got, pneumonia-wise in particular. Some of the, I suppose, a big increase here in recent years has been building new calf houses, and the eternal debate about what's the perfect calf house, etc. Is it too cold? Is it too humid? Is more of an issue almost than it is than heat or cold is. And I suppose two things. One, from a humidity point of view, is the moisture that's created by the calf urine, trying to get that away from the calf, but also out of the house. I mean, there's countless new calf sheds that when you walk in, the calves are dry, but there's a big puddle of a mixture of water from the automatic feeder being cleaned and urine from the calf sitting in the middle. I mean, that's, no matter what, the best of intentions, that's going to drive humidity up. And then touching on what you said about air exchange, a lot of these sheds are built, and depending on where they're sitting into the prevailing wind, even with Yorkshire boarding, there's a more and more common conversation now about adding mechanical ventilation, not just to bring air in, but to actually move the air out of the shed. It's an air exchange as opposed to just bringing air into the shed to get humidity down.
Okay, Anna, any comments on mechanical ventilation and how to apply it and what you think in sheds?
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what Eamon says again. So thinking about if you are going to invest in things like your positive pressure ventilation tubes, making sure that they are purposed, like they're fit for your shed. You know, just getting something off the shelf might mean that we're not getting the clean air at the level that we need it. So if you are going to invest, really do get some specialist advice on that before you spend your money. In addition to that, if you've got nowhere for that dirty air to go, we're not really going to achieve what we want to. So thinking about the inlets and the outlets, how can that clean air come in and how can that dirty air get out? The AHDB resources over in the UK are really useful. There's some better housing design resources that I would recommend to anybody. But one of the biggest things is just stop creating moisture where you don't need to. If you're mixing milk in a calf shed, why? If you're cleaning buckets in a calf shed, why? All of that should be done outside the calf housing for me, because we've already got the things that they're going to naturally do to create moisture.
Okay, moisture is the enemy. And just a quick note on that as well, when it comes to mechanical tubes, it's really important you put in the tubes that are fitted to the shed. So the holes and the dimensions of the holes are specific to your shed. Some companies, most companies do it, some don't. So that's a mistake. Sometimes I see that these retrofitted standard tubes go in the wrong position and they don't drive air where it's going. Okay, brilliant. Okay, this is a long question. I'll try and summarize it basically, but it's looking for advice. Unfortunately, this is going to be quite a common condition over the next 3 to 4 weeks on farms, is a rotavirus outbreak. Everything was going well until Monday. Now it started, it's running through the shed. I had in the farm 10 years ago with a combination of cleaning, disinfection, and vaccination. I escaped it completely for the last 5 years. It's very frustrating to see it return this year. I built a new calf shed last year, and which I used for calves. Shed was washed and disinfected. I'm not looking forward to the next few weeks. I don't think they are. So thoughts on rotavirus outbreaks now? You can talk about vaccination if you want or whatever, but you know, in the middle of an outbreak, Hannah, I'll go to you first. And you're agreeing on everything. You need to disagree on something here as well. So, Hannah, I'll go to you first on that person, unfortunately, who's in the middle of a rotavirus outbreak.
Yeah, firstly, I really feel for you. It is crap and it is rubbish, but you will get through it. The key thing for me is supportive therapy. So if we know what, we've got to break the cycle where we can. So thinking about, is it coming from that calving yard, which is highly likely? If it is, how can we get our calves out the calving yard as soon as possible? Thinking about how we're moving them from there. Disinfection in as many points as possible, just again to break it up. If you've got a set of overalls that you wear when you're with your cows, actually now's the time to get a separate set for when you're with your calves. So 2 completely different sets of overalls. And this is the kind of time where, similar to what I said about arrivals of calves, when you're bringing them in, mix up some big buckets of electrolytes so those calves can also, you know, between milk feeds can self-select a little bit. I think the more we can do to keep that electrolyte balance, the more they are going to be able to get through it, because ultimately electrolytes and anti-inflammatories are going to be what helps them kind of self-cure, if you like. So break the cycle with disinfection where you can, use your separate overalls, and make sure you're getting the right therapy into calves.
Eamon, any comments?
Yeah, I'd add to what, like, Anna's covered everything that is to do with a rotavirus outbreak. There's nothing to add to that from a rotavirus point of view. I suppose one thing I would caveat what he has, the question that person has asked, sorry, is that has a rotavirus outbreak, is it, I suppose to go back one step, is it a true rotavirus outbreak? I mean, only that it makes sense to me from a farm I was on today where the call was, we've got calves with scour. Let's go have a look. So the first thing you do is you arrive out and you take your sample and it's positive for rotavirus, but most stressed calves will probably shed some element of rotavirus somewhere in the sample. And if you stand back, which we did today a little bit, and you say, well, they're scoured, they've got loose, maybe dung, but it's not your true, absolute watery scour where we're getting very, very sick, dehydrated calves. And as it turned out today, I think that rotavirus outbreak is a secondary to a pneumonia outbreak originally. So the rotavirus the scour is a symptom, but is it true rotavirus that's causing the problem? And it may not be. Sometimes we find those, the farmer thinks is a scour is obviously a wet back end and a loose dung, but it can be related to something going on in the background, in particular a pneumonia like the likes of your mycoplasma or your RSV or your Staphylococcus or something that's the original issue. So sometimes you can be obsessed with treating the loose species, and you can cover all the basics, and you're saying, God, we're not getting out of it, and now we're getting secondary pneumonias because the calves were scoured. But and I would argue sometimes in a lot of occasions, it's possible that the pneumonia is there first, and when that gets addressed, the scour, I won't say self-resolves. Obviously, you have to use your electrolytes and you have to take all the precautions involved with the scour, but maybe don't just presume. And this might be a little bit, I won't say defeatist, because you're going, God, is it only rotavirus is bad enough to deal with? But I think sometimes you can get out of a rotavirus outbreak if something else is causing the issue originally by finding that initial cause and addressing that as well. It might be in the short term more work, both financially and labor, but in the longer term, over 2 to 3 weeks, you might get a much better bounce and not have that continue for the rest of the spring. Not saying this is that person's actual issue, but definitely worth investigating and not putting on the blinkers to purely this is rotavirus and nothing else.
Okay, very good. Again, if that person is listening, we'll send some information around precision microbes, and it can be a useful tool at higher doses to help recovery as an aid as well. Okay, is saliva important when getting colostrum in? We tube everything to get intakes, but worry they're not salivating. We kind of answered that before, a little bit around tubing versus, I think you both answered it unless you have anything else. Saliva is important, but if you want to add anything in, Hannah or Eamon, please do. Hannah, I'll go to you.
Yeah, if you can bottle where you can. I don't think the saliva is the key bit of that, though, in all honesty. I think the transfer of antibodies is the real critical step.
Okay, I'm going to move on because we have lots of questions now. How long should I feed a calf meal at 16%? When should it be dropped? I'm presuming that's 16% crude protein. Any thoughts on that? Two things. I think starch sometimes I like nutrition myself, I'm not a nutritionist, but starch is something I'd always watch later on to rumination or to during rumen development, that it's not over 30%. But my theory on that 16% would be well after weaning, and it depends whether you're weaning out the grass or whether you're weaning indoors. But have any of you any comments on crude protein levels and when it should be dropped down in meal for calves? Any thoughts? Eamon, go to you first.
As I'd say, I think everybody stick to their own lane, Tommy. You're into specialist nutrition, and as you said there, in particular, depending on where they're weaning their calves onto, like what's coming into the diet next. Is it rocket fuel grass? Are they weaning indoors? There's going to be massive variations on when you should be dropping that. So I wouldn't advise specifically, simply because I'm very, very happy to know my limits as regards giving advice on particular things, and changing crude protein content to starters is not one of them, I would say.
Good to know the limits. Hannah, do you know your limits? Do you want to make a comment?
I'm very similar to Eamon in this respect, but I do think, you know, you can go a fair bit past weaning and still be up at 16% protein. The other thing I would say is no matter what you do, and think about how many things you're changing at once. So don't go making a diet change at the same time as making a group change, at the same time as another stressor. So whenever you are going to do it, targeting it at the right time is key.
I think that's a key thing, the impact of stress, be it weather, castration, whatever. We don't want to stack them on top of each other. Is wooden pinning or wooden feed troughs a bad thing in a calf shed, or is that nonsense? Straight to the point. Is it nonsense, wooden feeding troughs? You mentioned blue barrels there. Any thoughts, Eamon? I'll go to you first on wooden pinning or wooden feed troughs.
It's like a lot of things. They're all good till they're bad. Wood is just wonderful at holding on to all the bugs that exist. And I know we have a lot of progressive younger farmers here who talk about their dad or their uncle who used to rear 30 calves in wooden pallets, and the calves ate all the pallets and there was never any disease. But we're in a different world of higher numbers and higher infection pressure. And I think if you can take every chance you can to reduce that, and one place that bugs will hide out, even down to that really ugly looking ringworm hiding out in wood for long periods, I personally would not be a fan. And if we walk into a scour outbreak in particular and you look around and you see like there's old wooden pinning and old wood, like how can you clean and disinfect that thoroughly? I don't think it's possible personally. So again, if it's working, great, but when it stops working, I think you have to go nuclear then and get rid of it.
Okay, Anna, any comments on wooden pinning, wooden feed troughs?
With everything, control the controllables. If you can control reducing that contamination level, which we know wood is going to be higher at harbouring stuff, why wouldn't you? So yeah, I'm exactly the same. I think I would avoid it if you can.
It's probably the minutiae details of calf rearing as opposed to some of the key things you covered earlier on. But look, a good question. There is no silly questions. These are all questions we need to look at and answer. One, again, it's back to your stomach tubing versus bottling. Stomach tubing 4 litres. It's a day or so before I get them back on the suck. Is this too long? 24 hours for the next suckle. This is why I would slightly disagree with stomach tubing calves, and I agree with bottle feeding calves. But it's easy. No, I do most of my farming, and that whiteboard behind me is that it's easier to get the second feed into the calf. I find it better for suckle reflex. That's my opinion. But just, is it too long? Is 24 hours too long before that calf suckles? Eamon, opinion?
No, I think you've got to weigh off the pros and cons of what you're going to do. So if you give your stomach tube at 3 a.m. and you get your 4 litres plus of colostrum into that calf, well, if he doesn't drink until the following afternoon after milking, I'm not worried. I mean, he's got his energy. He's in a nice warm bed. He's got his colostrum into him. Super. I mean, yes, in an ideal world, he'd feed again in 5 or 6 hours, but like he's not a suckler anymore. We've moved so far away now from the two types of animals that they're almost non-comparable. Like a beef animal under its mother drinking colostrum and sucking every couple of hours is completely and utterly different to a dairy animal. So I'm very happy if they get the 4 litres in and that calf sleeps for 12 hours or more, 18 hours even. I'd be trying to feed them after that stage, all right. I mean, 24 hours is a little bit of a stretch, but I still wouldn't be overly panicked. I mean, if you've gotten the colostrum in and that calf is comfortable, you've done your job. If the trade-off is you're going to try and make him suck and you're going to fall down because your labour and your time is too constrained, well then I'm taking the tube in and wait your time rather than the other way around.
Okay, and any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you only get one opportunity at that first feed. You only get one chance to do it, and we know the absorption capability of that gut reduces as soon as that calf hits the deck. We also know as soon as you've got that first feed in, it's going to start reducing. So why not get that first feed in a really good, proper way to give yourself the best possible chance? And, you know, like Eamon says, I think accepting that you might not get that second feed in as easy or a little bit delayed, at least you know you've done that first step completely correct.
Okay, brilliant. Next question is, what's your opinion on once daily milk feeding? We know there's a legal limit on that. That's my caveat there. For calves, it's recommended by some milk replacement companies. It works on some farms, I suppose, going to once a day. Any opinions on once a day feeding of milk, either of you?
I'm not a big fan. I quite like to eat regularly. I quite like to have all the nutrition I need for energy. And I certainly know, whilst I've had a cold recently, I've probably actually eaten a little bit more than usual. So just to humanise our baby calves, if we want them to grow, if we want them to fight off infection, I'm not a big fan of once a day feeding until we know they're taking in good levels of starter.
Eamon?
Yeah, I really think what Hannah said there is worth focusing on, especially the term baby calves. Like we can't forget that these are just babies. Like I don't think there's anybody on this webinar who has kids that would feed their 10-year-old or their 6-year-old in the morning at 7:30 a massive dinner and then say, hey, best of luck, bud, I'll see you tomorrow morning. You wouldn't do it to anybody. I think it's a labor saving issue most of all. Like if you're looking to push your calves to the max and get the most out of them in an environment and a world now where calves have never been worth more at present, like we should just be feeding them twice a day. I think it's as simple as that. I mean, yeah, of course there is companies that will advert once a day feeding. Everybody's advocating something to make life easier for everybody, but we've got baby calves that we want to get maximum benefit out of and maximum thrive out of. And in my opinion, the only way to do that is feeding twice a day.
Okay,
it's a bit like I said with colostrum, Tommy, just to come on again, you don't get that pre-weaning opportunity any other time for an animal to be that feed efficient. You know, if you're thinking about your dairy heifer, all that mammary tissue, all that kind of milk producing potential, you're going to capitalize on the pre-weaning period. You know, capitalizing on the genetic potential of your dairy cross beef, you're never going to have as feed efficient a time of an animal's life. So why wouldn't you go hell for leather when you can?
Okay, very good. I was on a farm last week, just a little plug for the YouTube channel. If you go, there's a lot of reaction to the video. It's a farm in Galway. They're rearing a lot of calves, small crossbred calf. They started in dairy in 2023. They were feeding 2 litres twice a day. They were recommended. They've gone now to 4 litres twice daily from the very beginning with a small calf, and they can just see a massive difference. So it's in action on a farm. Again, this is probably Ireland related, Hannah, but interested to get your opinion. So you mentioned summer scar syndrome, Eamon, on your video, which maybe some of our UK listeners will be wondering, what is that? It's an issue we see at grazing with calves over the last number of years. There's an increased, and I think this is where the question is coming, there's an increased move and an argument for feeding more forages to calves. So straw is not a forage fibre, like silage and hay. So the question is, Eamon, I'll go to you and I'd like to hear Hannah's opinion. What age would you switch from feeding straw to silage? And I think that's relative to your grazing system potentially. Yeah, I think, and it's a plug for somebody's knowledge here. He's a friend of mine and yours, Seamus Fagan, that works in Athlone in the regional veterinary lab. I think he probably has a font of knowledge than the combined 200 and whatever attendees plus us that are on here tonight about calf health and calf nutrition. And I think he's obsessed is the right word with people ignoring forage as a really, really important ingredient into a young calf's life. I mean, it's like every question, Tommy, I suppose it's not as simple as when should a calf get access to silage, because you and I know that the silage that's on different farms is of wildly varying quality and consistency and digestibility. I mean, you go from a wet pit of silage that sometimes I wonder how the cows even eat, to some of that really, really dry, long fibre haylage that, again, is the other end of the spectrum. I'm personally a firm believer in introducing that relatively early on, not early on in the first week or two, but I mean early on, once you get to the point of view 3-4 weeks up to a month old, to start putting some quality, though, is the key, and ability to eat it and digest it. I mean, even when you talk about straw, like the length of those bits, you often see the calf, and he's got this big long strand of straw hanging out of his mouth. He's not going to be able to eat that. Like, he's playing with it. And the same with the silage. If you haven't got chopped, fresh, nicely edible, palatable forage, well, the calf isn't going to eat that. So just having it in front of the calf isn't good enough. I think we have to really start to get down into the nitty-gritty of, is it palatable, is it digestible, is it fresh repeatedly? Like, we're just about coming around to the fact that we can have a change of concentrate every day in the bottom of the trough and not just leave it there for the birds to eat for these young calves. So I think the same has to be said for silage. And then we have to start watching really, really closely as the temperatures go up in March and April. Is that highly digestible, highly palatable silage that you're putting in front of those calves? You don't want that to go off either, because then you get the lovely word, that's the buzzword again, mycotoxins and fungus and all that jazz that can upset the apple cart. So if you're going to do it,
the attention to detail has to be excellent. So I'd argue if you're going to do it with attention to detail, it's absolutely worth doing, well worth doing, and well worth putting the time into. But if you're going to do it just, I'll show them a fork of silage today and I'll wait and it's gone, I'll show them a fork of silage in 2 days' time, and my argument will be we'll do more harm than good. But from a summer scour syndrome thing, which is, it's almost a topic I hate even mentioning now because it gathers so much almost hatred from my Irish farmers. But it's worth pointing out here, the middle of February, that the work you put into your calf and how you wean it, even if it's a very sensitive topic, is going to determine how that calf works at grass. We can blame grass, we can blame grass quality, we can blame oil content of grass, we can blame a lot of things to do with grass, but in reality, if your calf's rumen isn't prepared, it doesn't stand a chance. I mean, there's all the other issues we can talk about strict grazing and all that stuff about summer scour. That's another webinar on its own. But if your calf's rumen isn't developed enough, when it goes out to this rocket fuel grass that our Irish dairy farms seem to be growing in abundance now, well then it doesn't stand a chance. It's going to get summer scour syndrome. It's going to lose condition, and all that hard work you put in, feeding it all the extra milk and the colostrum, etc., will be undone in about 10 days.
Excellent. Okay, and any comments on that from your perspective? I know you work with a lot of grazing herds as well.
Yeah, I do. I'll be honest though, we haven't seen huge amounts of it with the herds that I've worked with. I'm quite mindful of staying in my own lane, but I do think anything you can do to develop that rumen, like, why wouldn't you do it? So thinking about that gradual weaning, thinking about whatever you're putting into your baby calves should be just as good quality as you can get it. So yeah, I'll stop at that, I think.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in here. I'm going to ask you one question individually each now, because we'll move through it. So again, everybody's staying on and people are asking questions. So I'm mindful of everybody's time, including the speaker's time, as well. But I think when people are asking, I'm going to keep going. Hannah, should you feed leftover first colostrum from cow or fresh second milk from cow as a second feed to the calf?
Okay, if you are going to do it, please make sure it is clean. And by that, I mean, if it is sat in a bucket on the side for the last 12 hours, it shouldn't go anywhere near any kind of calf. We know our bugs, our bacteria will multiply, will double every 20 minutes. So you can feed it. Was the question feed it as a first feed, Tommy?
Second feed. So keeping colostrum for the second feed or the second milk. So we haven't even talked about transition milk really this evening.
I am a fan of that if we can, but please make sure it is clean. If you're going to do it, use your Orbiseal tubs as a great sealed container and pop it in a fridge straight away, and then feed it. And yeah, you may still get good local action of those antibodies. They might mop up any bugs that come into the gut lumen. So yeah, I don't mind feeding that.
Okay, next question is from me. I've been using precision microbes for 2 years. I'm very satisfied. Good to hear. We give to bucket-fed calves daily, but once calves move on to automatic feeder, there's no compartment in the feeder to put the liquid in. What would you advise? You need a liquid dispenser for an automated feeder. It can be retrofitted onto your automated feeder. Info at Precision Microbes, send us your details and we can talk you through what's involved there. Temperature to feed milk at. So Eamon, I'll go back to you. I've increased it to 41 to 42 degrees due to fluctuating weather. So wondering, should I feed it at that permanently instead of decreasing to 38, 39 dependent on ambient? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, you're really down to the nitty-gritty there, and I think it's more important, it's more important where you're taking that temperature. Are you taking that temperature over at the mixing point and then you're trucking that milk across the yard and it's 15 minutes before the calves get milk? I mean, we're splitting hairs almost to an extent with temperatures like that. The one thing I'd say is maybe just make sure you stick to manufacturer's recommendations when you're mixing that milk replacer. Some of them require higher, some of them aren't so specific. But where we see people fall down is they take the temperature at the mixer. Bingo, I'm at 38, 39, happy days. By the time the last calf gets it, it's chopped to half. So I think maybe focusing on that as opposed to splitting hairs down by a degree or two might be more of something to focus on. And look, not knowing that person, maybe that's where they're taking it, but I wouldn't get too obsessed with the 1 or 2 degrees. I'd be happier to stick to manufacturer's regs and make sure that milk gets to the calf as quickly as possible after you've taken that temperature.
Hannah, it sounds like this person is implementing the 1% rule, looking for that fine detail. What's your thoughts on that temperature? Any comments?
Yeah, I think Measure it when you get to the calves. Think about when you mix in big volumes of milk, like Eamon says, actually should you be doing 2 runs of smaller volumes so that you're getting that consistent temperature delivered to every calf.
Okay, and I'll just ask you this question as well. We kind of covered it. Is cold whole milk okay for calves, Hannah?
Whole milk is okay, but if you have any issues with mycoplasma, please make sure you have seen whether you have got any circulating in your cows. So milk is a perfect way of spreading mycoplasma into your baby calves. So doing something like a bulk milk tank, or even testing, making sure you regularly test mastitis cases. So yeah.
I'd certainly see with most of our bulk tank here, like 80, I don't know, the figure was quite high for bulk tank positives. But what we would say is try and certainly avoid feeding whole mastitic milk to cows, waste milk. You know, waste milk obviously has not been fed, but think about that waste milk that's mastitic. It could be full of mycoplasma. So I'm going to keep going here because we've still a few questions. The next question is, any way to prevent bloat on calves fed milk replacer? Milk bar is spotless, milk measured perfectly and temperature correct. Whisks, no lumps, water has been tested and free of bacteria. Meal and roughage available, 23% protein, good quality milk replacer. Any thoughts on that? Hannah, I'll go to you first. You talked about teat size there. Is that something you'd look at, or is there something else you'd look at?
Yeah, so you could do. So it's working out why are they bloating. So, you know, we said at the very start, calves crave consistency. It sounds like this person is ticking off pretty much every box when it comes to consistency. So why do we still think we're getting it? And then you're probably onto those tiny different things that could make a difference. When do they get bloat? Is it that it's happening all the time, or is it that certain things are going on? Has it been that they've been in the day before and done a load of disbudding and suddenly we get bloat the next day? What, to me, it's, without knowing the farm, it's looking at what specific risk factors might be happening on there that are predisposing these little babies.
Okay, brilliant. Eamon, any comments?
Not a whole lot to add. I mean, don't know that we still fully understand it. I even know that UCD are working on Excel Vets there to do a project this year with about abomasal bloat, trying to get to the bottom of it. Clostridial involvement there as well. But as Hannah said, like what's the precursor? That's what we're always looking for. Is there, like, obviously that person's in the 1% club there. They're ticking all the boxes. They're obsessed with detail. But to call a spade, there has to be a precursor somewhere, because the majority of farms that cover that kind of detail don't get abomasal bloat. So there's a precursor underlying somewhere. It's just to get to the bottom of it, which can be very frustrating and difficult depending on where you are.
Seems to be anecdotal people using clostridial vaccines where they've ruled out everything else with some results in those cases. But again, talk to your own vet. Okay, quickly going down, any test to check on rumen development other than post-mortem? So what are your thoughts? Rumen development, cutting, feces, anything else?
Yeah, you could do post-weaning BHBs. So that's where you look at blood BHB levels. Our friend from France, Olivier, he shared that with us at the conference back in November. So yeah, I can't remember the cutoffs. I have a funny feeling it might be 1.1, but please have a chat to your vets about that. So I would say you probably want to be sampling about 6 in the group. You don't want to be doing just the odd one here or there. Try and get a picture of what's going on at a group level. But yeah, post-wean BHBs are something that are developing and you can use as a tool.
Very useful tool. So it's a snap blood test used in cows quite frequently. And I thought it was a bit of a revelation when I heard it. And I can't remember exactly, but I think it's actually lower again. I think it's 0.2, 0.3 was the cutoff he was using for calves post-weaning. Any comments on that other than what we mentioned, Eamon?
No, that's fully covered, Tom. I'd be happy with that, Shane.
Okay. Any thoughts on offering rock salt to young calves?
Anecdotally, they quite like it and it can help drive intake sometimes, but it also just gives me the cringes a bit in terms of being a vector of infection. If you've got anything like mycoplasma going along and they're all going in and licking it, it's very hard to keep clean.
Okay.
I'd echo that, yeah. I have a personal dislike for it, to be honest. It looks nice, but they slobber all over it. So it's almost like a single teat feeder that's not disinfected. Everything lives in there. So I'd be happy to avoid even go a step further.
Okay, people are still staying on, so they want to hear the answer to these questions. So I'm going to keep going. Feeding milk replacer 12.5% versus 20%. Looking to feed Angus calves for growth. Not worried about the cost of milk replacer, just want good growth. What would be a good amount of milk replacer powder per calf per feed? Feeding the 900 grams milk replacer at 20% versus 12.5%. Hannah, you kind of covered this off. I missed this question earlier on, but you did quite a bit on milk replacement and feeding. Will I go to you first on that question?
Yeah, I wouldn't go anywhere over 15% if I can avoid it. I know people say they can, but I just think from an abomasal health perspective, it's probably a poor analogy, but it's a bit like going from a coma to a vindaloo. Like in terms of the shock and actually me being able to cope with that myself, I like to use things that I can relate to a little bit. I don't think I'd know what would hit me, to be honest with you. So for me, maxing it out at 15%, you can still get your 900 grams in really nicely. If you do 150 grams a litre, that's dead simple. You know, you're only feeding 3 litres there. If you did want to get more into your calves and you're not afraid of spending money, I would suggest that you do 150 grams and get up to 4 litres twice a day, or even 5. Just do that real gradual wean over 3 weeks that we talked about.
Eamon, any comments on that?
Yeah, I just think that the percentages is my issue there. I think they're like getting the litres into calves at the rate Hannah said. I mean, we have calves on ad lib whole milk feeding and they're drinking 14 and 15 litres a day. There's no issue with getting litres into calves. It's just I'd be worried about the percentage there. That's a bit excessive on the 20%.
Okay, excellent. Last couple of questions. Quote of the night, from a Corma to a Vindaloo. I'll have to remember that one, Hannah. Thoughts on freezing colostrum? Eamon, I'll go to you first. Thoughts on freezing colostrum? Just simple tips on it.
Just hygiene number 1. Do it right. Nice flat pack freezer. There's a lot of companies selling those freezing bags for colostrum. The biggest thing for me is thawing it. We still hear about people putting it in the microwave, killing off every bit of the good or the immunoglobulins in there, denaturing the proteins, etc. So freeze it properly, nice and clean. So harvest it nice and clean, flat pack bag, put it in your freezer, but thaw it properly, water bath, and measure before you freeze. There's nothing worse than somebody freezing 10 bags of colostrum that's not of good enough quality, and then you've got a load of calves that don't have enough in their system. So quality, hygiene, and thaw properly. That'll be my 3.
Brilliant. Hannah, anything to add?
No, I'd be the same.
Okay, I'm going to ask you 1 or 2 more questions because I think you've actually answered some of these questions throughout the presentation. And remember that we're going to send out Eamon's recording again. There'll be a lot more info going out as well. We might even share some of those links, Hannah, you mentioned on housing, because I think they're very useful from AHDB. Or yeah, I've got that right. Just budding, Hannah, just a quick question. Age and also knockout or not? Sedate or not?
Yeah, so in terms of sedate or not, whatever works best for your system. If I'm doing large numbers, I think sedation makes it a lot easier. Obviously, local and metacam or whatever anti-inflammatory you choose to use are a given. Age, anywhere from 3-4 weeks onwards, I'm happy with. The sooner you do it, the better, and keep it as far away from weaning as you can.
Eamon, any comments on that?
Only comment I have is I knew that study that came out last year that talked about a slight, ever so marginal decrease in daily live weight gain for those calves that were knocked down disbudded. I would be happy entirely to just ignore that and to knock down disbud every calf that comes in front of me, because I think they recover quicker. They're back drinking that evening, and echo Hannah, the pain relief in the local is non-negotiable as well.
Okay, one thing I've learned about this project with precision microbes, research versus the evidence on the farm, there can always be a difference between the two, and we have to look at what works on farm as well. Okay, just a comment on the bloated calf problem, lowering the height of the feeder health needs. That's something as well that's important, that feeders are at the right height. It's a good thing. It's that kind of detail that person probably needs to look at. Love this webinar, very interesting. Last comment, Tommy, you didn't have enough time. You're doing a great. Oh, that's my mother. Sorry. Okay. At that rate of going, guys, I think I'm going to close off questions to both of you, and I have to say you're both busy practitioners. I'd first of all like to thank you for your time. Really, really interesting. You're both incredibly passionate about what you do. You're excellent communicators. You're really great representatives for the veterinary profession, both in Ireland and the UK. So thank you very much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it for both of you, and I think everyone would have appreciated your insights as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping as well. I was nearly going to the pub across the road from my office at 5 to 8 tonight because every piece of technology we had was not working, and I would like to thank Aidan in Interchem, who has been in the background since the beginning. This has been one of the more difficult webinars with videos and internet. So a big thank you to Aidan, a big massive thank you to the Interchem team as well. They're hosted the webinar. So if you have questions about precision microbes in Ireland, talk to the Interchem team, talk to your own vet. If you have questions outside of Ireland, contact us and we'll help you out in that way as well. So I know a lot of people stayed on to the very end as well. So I think, you know, it's a testament to the quality of the speakers, with huge numbers of people tuned in tonight. And I know it's a busy time, so stay safe and have a good season ahead. Any last comments from Eamon or Hannah? I'll give you a final word each before we close out.
Ladies first, Hannah, go ahead.
I'm going to steal yours. Boring but brilliant. I think get those bits right and you'll nail it.
Eamon?
Yeah, just it's the same thing. The boring stuff is the easy stuff, is the important stuff. So just focus on it. If there's any changes to be made, make one, try it for a week, then make another. Don't bite off more than you can chew. And look, get enough of sleep and enough of rest. I mean, animals will be there again tomorrow. If you're not, that's an issue, you know.
Excellent. Okay, on that note, thank you both. Thank you everybody for their time. Happy safe farming. And don't ask me to host a webinar for at least another year.
Stop. It's hugely entertaining, Tommy. Go again. Yeah.
We've got a stress behind the scenes. Good bit. Okay, Hannah, thanks so much. Good night and stay safe.
Thanks,
see you later.
guys.
Bye.